For 3 full days, the human delegation sat in the observation gallery and watched the council proceedings. Ambassador Kane took detailed notes about each species she could identify, their behavior patterns, and how they interacted with others. Dr. Peters studied the biological diversity around them, fascinated by the different ways intelligence had evolved throughout the galaxy. Colonel Davis quietly assessed the military implications of what she was seeing, noting which species appeared to be warriors and which seemed more peaceful. The council operated in a way that was completely foreign to human diplomatic experience. Species would interrupt each other constantly. Sometimes multiple conversations would happen simultaneously, and the noise level rarely dropped below what humans would consider a loud roar. The translation systems worked overtime to convert hundreds of different languages into something the humans could understand, though much was still lost in the process. On the morning of the 4th day, everything changed. The massive being that served as council speaker, a creature called Zixith from something called the Alterian Collective, raised all 6 of its arms for silence. The chamber gradually quieted, which seemed to be a rare occurrence based on the surprised reactions from many species. Speaker. Zixith's voice boomed across the chamber through the translation system. It announced that the time had come to formally recognize the newest species to request council membership. The human delegation from the planet Earth would now be invited to present their case for joining the galactic community. The chamber fell completely silent for the first time since the humans had arrived. Hundreds of alien eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs focused on the observation gallery where the human delegation sat. Ambassador Kane felt the weight of that attention as she stood up from her seat. She walked slowly down to the main floor of the chamber, her footsteps echoing. In the unusual quiet, the speaking platform was designed to accommodate many different types of beings, so it automatically adjusted to her human proportions as she approached. Lisa Kane had given thousands of speeches during her diplomatic career, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. Standing before representatives of what appeared to be over 200 different species, Ambassador Kane opened her mouth to speak. Every being in the chamber leaned forward to hear humanity's first words to the galaxy. The moment stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Lisa Kane said 2 simple words. "We listen." She turned around and walked back to her seat. The silence that followed was even more profound than before. For nearly a minute, no being in the chamber made any sound at all. Then the chaos erupted. Species began talking, shouting, and making various noises all at once. The translation systems became overwhelmed trying to process the sudden flood of communication. Speaker Zixith pounded what appeared to be a ceremonial staff against the platform to restore some semblance of order. When the noise level dropped enough for communication, it demanded clarification from the human representative. What did she mean by, "we listen"? Was this some sort of primitive greeting? Did the humans not understand the purpose of this gathering? Ambassador Kane stood again and returned to the speaking platform. This time she said 3 words. "We are learning." Then she sat down again. The reaction was even more intense than before. A species that looked like walking crystals began flashing patterns of light that the translation system indicated were expressions of extreme displeasure. A group of beings covered in what appeared to be metallic scales started making sounds, like angry machinery. Several species began arguing among themselves about what the humans might be trying to accomplish. Dr. Peters watched the biological responses of different species to the human approach. Some showed signs of confusion, others appeared angry, and a few seemed curious about what would happen next. The diversity of reactions was as fascinating as the diversity of the species themselves. Colonel Davis noted, which species seemed most hostile to humanity's unusual diplomatic approach. A group calling themselves the Velkan Empire appeared particularly agitated, their representatives gesturing aggressively toward the human gallery. She made mental notes about their apparent military bearing and the advanced technology they displayed. Commander Hayes watched from a secure communication link aboard the Meridian. His ship remained docked at the orbital station, ready to depart quickly if the diplomatic mission went badly. He had orders to protect the human delegation at all costs, but he also understood that starting a war with a galactic government would not be in Earth's best interests. Over the following days, the human delegation continued their unusual approach to galactic diplomacy. They attended every council session, sitting quietly in their assigned seats and observing everything that happened. When directly questioned by other species, they gave minimal responses that revealed little about human intentions or capabilities. Ambassador Kane spoke only when specifically asked to do so by Speaker Zixith, and even then her answers were brief and thoughtful. When asked about human military strength, she said, "We defend what matters." When questioned about human technology, she replied, "We build what we need." When pressed about human territorial ambitions, she answered, "We grow where we can flourish." This approach frustrated many council species beyond measure. The Velkan Empire accused humans of arrogance, claiming that their silence showed disrespect for galactic traditions. A species called the Chattari Consortium suggested that humans might be too primitive to understand the proceedings. Others wondered if there was something wrong with human communication abilities. Dr. Peters continued his observations, learning more about galactic biology in a few weeks than humans had discovered in decades of exploration. He began to understand that many species had evolved very different approaches to communication and social interaction. Some species thought primarily in mathematical concepts, others relied heavily on pheromone exchanges, and still others communicated through complex light patterns. Colonel Davis quietly studied the military aspects of what she observed. She noted which species carried weapons, how different governments organized their security forces, and what technologies might pose threats to human space. Her analysis suggested that while the Council maintained peace between member species, several major military powers existed within the organization. The human approach began to have unexpected effects on Council proceedings. Some species started paying more attention to what others were actually saying, rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. A few representatives began taking notes about the points raised by different speakers, instead of focusing solely on advancing their own agendas. Speaker Zixith noticed these changes and found them interesting. In its thousands of years of experience with the Council, it had never seen species modify their behavior in response to simple observation. The human presence was somehow affecting the entire dynamic of galactic politics, without the humans saying or doing anything obvious. As the weeks passed, more species began to wonder about human motivations. Were they planning something? Did their silence hide advanced intelligence gathering? Were they studying Council weaknesses for some future attack? The uncertainty made some species nervous, while others became genuinely curious about these strange, new beings. The human delegation maintained their patient observation. They learned about trade disputes between different sectors of the galaxy, territorial conflicts over resource-rich systems, and complex alliance structures that had developed over millennia. They began to understand that galactic politics was far more complicated than human international relations had ever been. Ambassador Kane realized that humanity was learning more about the galaxy by staying quiet than they could have discovered through any amount of questioning or negotiation. The other species were revealing their true natures, their fears, their ambitions, and their weaknesses simply by continuing their normal behavior, while humans watched and listened. The test was just beginning. The human delegation had been observing Council proceedings for 30 days when the crisis began. It started with emergency signals flooding into the Council chamber from 3 different sectors of the galaxy. The translation system struggled to keep up with the flood of panicked communications coming from multiple star systems simultaneously. The first reports came from the peaceful Thylan Republic, a species of gentle beings who resembled large, intelligent plants. Their homeworld was under attack by something called the Chronim Horde, a group that the humans had not yet encountered in their observations. The Thylan representatives in the Council chamber began making high-pitched sounds that the translators identified as distress calls. Within minutes, similar reports arrived from the Nexari Federation and the Kef Collective. All 3 species were being attacked at the same time by Chronim forces that had appeared without warning in their home systems. The attacks were coordinated and brutal, with civilian populations being targeted along with military installations. The Council chamber erupted into chaos that made their previous sessions look organized by comparison. Species jumped from their seats, some literally flying or floating toward the communication stations, to get more information about the attacks. Others began shouting accusations about intelligence failures and demanding immediate military responses. Speaker Zixith struggled to maintain any semblance of order, as representatives from dozens of species tried to speak at once. Some wanted to send immediate military aid to the attacked worlds, others worried about leaving their own territories undefended, and still others began arguing about who was responsible for preventing such attacks in the first place. The human delegation sat quietly in their observation gallery, but they were far from inactive. Ambassador Kane activated her secure communication link to Commander Hayes aboard the Meridian. Colonel Davis began recording everything she could observe about the Council's crisis response procedures. Dr. Peters watched how different species reacted to stress and emergency situations. Hours passed while the Council debated response strategies. The Velkan Empire argued for massive military retaliation against all suspected Chronim territories. The Silicon Collective wanted to withdraw their forces to protect their own worlds. A group of species called the Peaceful Alliance insisted on attempting diplomatic contact with the Chronim leadership before taking military action. Meanwhile, the attacks continued. Updated reports showed that Chronim forces were systematically destroying infrastructure and civilian centers on all 3 targeted worlds. The death toll was climbing rapidly, and refugee ships were beginning to flee the attacked systems in whatever vessels they could find. The human observers began to notice patterns in the Chronim attacks that the arguing council members were missing. Dr. Peters pointed out to his colleagues that the timing of the attack suggested careful planning and intelligence gathering. Colonel Davis noted that the target selection indicated strategic thinking beyond simple aggression. Ambassador Kane realized that someone had been watching the council just as carefully as the humans had been. After 6 hours of debate with no concrete action taken, Speaker Zixith made a desperate decision. The massive being turned toward the human observation gallery and spoke directly to Ambassador Kane. Its voice carried clearly through the chamber's translation system as it asked whether humanity had nothing to contribute to this crisis. The chamber fell silent as every being present turned to look at the humans. For 36 days they had listened without offering opinions or advice. Now, with worlds burning and thousands dying, the council was asking for their input. Ambassador Kane stood slowly and walked down to the speaking platform one more time. This time, however, her expression was different. The careful diplomatic neutrality was replaced by something that looked almost like sadness, mixed with determination. She began to speak, and for the first time since arriving at Kepler Prime, her words numbered more than a few sentences. She thanked Speaker Zixith and addressed the honored council members directly. She told them that humanity had listened to their debates for 36 days and had learned much about their strengths, their wisdom, and their challenges. Then she said something that surprised everyone in the chamber. Humanity offered their assistance not with words, but with action. She nodded toward the observation gallery where Commander Hayes appeared on a large holographic display that materialized above the speaking platform. Hayes began to explain what the human fleet had been doing while their diplomatic team observed council proceedings. The UES Meridian had not been alone at Kepler Prime. 12 human vessels had been positioned quietly throughout the outer rim for the past week, monitoring communications and observing unusual military activity. The humans had detected the Chronim military buildup 3 days before the attacks began. Human ships had been tracking Chronim movements and had identified the likely targets based on pattern analysis that Dr. Peters had developed while studying galactic politics. They had not warned the Council because they were still learning how galactic communication protocols worked, and did not want to cause diplomatic incidents over what might have been routine military exercises. Commander Hayes activated tactical displays showing the current status of all 3 attack zones. Human vessels were already engaging Chronim forces around each targeted world. The UES Pacific was coordinating civilian evacuations from the Thailand Republic. The UES Atlantic was providing defensive fire support to Nexari Federation forces. The UES Arctic was using electronic warfare techniques to disrupt Chronim communications in the KEF system. The council chamber remained completely silent as Hayes explained human tactical doctrine. Instead of massive fleet engagements that would cause additional civilian casualties, Human forces were using precision strikes to disable Cronim military assets while avoiding populated areas. They were sharing intelligence with local defense forces and coordinating rescue operations for refugees fleeing the combat zones. Dr. Peters took the platform next and revealed the analysis he had been conducting during their observation period. He had not just been studying Council species, he had been learning about their enemies as well. The Cronim horde followed predictable behavioral patterns that could be analyzed and countered. With the right information, he presented detailed predictions about Cronim tactics, including their likely next targets and the timing of future attacks. His analysis suggested that the current assault was just the beginning of a larger campaign designed to test Council response capabilities and identify weaknesses in galactic defense systems. Colonel Davis followed with tactical recommendations, tailored to each species' military capabilities. She had observed how different Council members approached warfare and had developed strategies that turned their diversity from a source of confusion into coordinated strength. Instead of trying to make everyone fight the same way, she proposed using each species' natural advantages and specialized roles. The Velkan Empire's aggressive tendencies could be channeled into direct assault operations. The Silicon Collective's technological superiority made them ideal for electronic warfare and intelligence gathering. The Peaceful Alliance's diplomatic skills could be used for prisoner negotiations and civilian evacuations. Ambassador Kane returned to the platform and made humanity's most significant statement yet. She proposed something she called the Silent Alliance, a rapid response protocol that would allow action to be taken immediately when threats were identified, without waiting for lengthy Council debates that gave enemies time to achieve their objectives. The proposal was revolutionary by Council standards. It suggested that sometimes action needed to come before discussion, that preparation was more valuable than reaction, and that observation could be more powerful than proclamation. Speaker Zixith looked around the chamber at representatives who were seeing galactic politics from an entirely new perspective. For the first time in the Council's history, a member species had offered solutions instead of problems, actions instead of arguments, and cooperation instead of competition. The tide of battle was already turning as human coordination transformed what had looked like inevitable defeat into organized resistance. The Cronim horde had expected panic and confusion from the Council. Instead, they faced coordinated opposition that had anticipated their moves and prepared effective countermeasures. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Earth's Voice, staring at the strange signal that had just appeared on his communications display. The message came from somewhere beyond the outer rim of human space, from coordinates that no Earth ship had ever visited. The transmission itself was unlike anything humans had ever received before. The signal contained mathematical sequences, star charts, and what appeared to be linguistic patterns from dozens of different sources. Jake called his communications officer, Lieutenant Danny Green, to help decode the message. Danny worked for 6 hours straight, his fingers dancing across holographic keyboards as he tried to make sense of the alien transmission. When Danny finally cracked the code, his face went pale. The message was an invitation, written in broken but understandable English. It came from something called the Galactic Harmony Council, and they were formally inviting humanity to send representatives to their capital world. The location was a planet they called Kepler Prime, located in a star system nearly 200 light-years from Earth. Jake immediately sent the message to Earth Command. Within hours, his secure communications channel lit up with calls from admirals, politicians, and scientists. Everyone wanted to know more about this council and what they wanted from humanity. The problem was that humans knew almost nothing about galactic politics or alien civilizations beyond their own small corner of space. Earth Command decided to send their best diplomatic team to make contact with the council. They chose Ambassador Lisa Kane, a woman who had spent 30 years negotiating treaties between Earth's various colonies. Lisa was known for her calm demeanor and her ability to listen carefully before speaking. She had successfully prevented 3 colonial wars through patient negotiation and careful understanding of all sides involved. The team also included Dr. Carl Peters, a xenobiologist who had studied every form of alien life that humans had encountered during their expansion into space. Carl was fascinated by the possibility of meeting intelligent alien species and learning about their biology and behavior. He brought extensive research equipment and spent weeks preparing for the journey by studying every available piece of data about non-human life forms. Colonel Amy Davis joined the team as military advisor. Amy had commanded frontier defense forces for over 15 years and understood both human military capabilities and the importance of showing strength without appearing threatening. She was tasked with assessing any potential threats while ensuring that humanity presented itself as peaceful but not weak. The team would travel aboard the UES Meridian, one of Earth's newest and most advanced ships. The Meridian was commanded by Commander Ben Hayes, a quiet and methodical officer who had earned respect throughout the fleet for his careful planning and steady leadership. Ben had never lost a ship or failed a mission in his 12 years of command. The journey to Kepler Prime took nearly 3 weeks using humanity's fastest hyperspace drive. During the trip, the team studied everything they could about the message they had received. The mathematical sequences suggested that the Council included species with very different ways of thinking about numbers and logic. The star charts showed territory that stretched across thousands of light years, indicating that this council controlled or influenced a vast portion of the galaxy. Most interesting to the team were the linguistic patterns. The message contained fragments of what appeared to be dozens of different languages, all woven together in complex ways. Dr. Peters theorized that the council might include many different species, each with their own way of communicating. This made the team both excited and nervous about what they would encounter. As the Meridian approached Kepler Prime, the crew was amazed by what they saw. The planet was surrounded by massive space stations and orbital platforms. Ships of every imaginable size and shape moved between the stations in carefully organized patterns. Some ships were sleek and metallic, others appeared to be grown rather than built, and a few seemed to be made of pure energy held together by unknown forces. The Meridian received docking instructions from planetary control, transmitted in the same multi-language format as the original invitation. Commander Hayes carefully followed the guidance, bringing his ship to dock at a station that seemed designed to accommodate vessels from many different species. The docking bay was enormous, with spaces for ships ranging from small shuttles to massive vessels that dwarfed anything humans had ever built. Ambassador Kane and her team disembarked wearing their formal diplomatic uniforms. They were met by a delegation of beings that looked nothing like humans. The leader was tall and thin, with blue-tinted skin and large, multifaceted eyes. It spoke through a translation device that converted its words into English. The being introduced itself as Guide Veltar and explained that it would escort the human delegation to the council chambers. As they walked through the station, the humans saw hundreds of different species going about their business. Some walked on 2 legs like humans, others floated or crawled or moved in ways that defied easy description. The diversity was overwhelming. Guide Veltar led them to a transport that carried them down to the planet's surface. The council building was a massive crystalline structure that rose from the ground like a mountain. Inside, corridors stretched in all directions, filled with beings of every imaginable type. The sounds, smells, and sights were completely alien to human senses. Finally, they reached the main council chamber. The room was a vast amphitheater with seating areas arranged in complex geometric patterns. Hundreds of different species occupied the various sections, and the noise level was incredible. Everyone seemed to be talking, arguing, or making sounds. That might have been their equivalent of speech. Ambassador Kane and her team were directed to an observation gallery overlooking the main floor. From their seats, they could see the entire proceedings. A massive being with multiple arms was currently addressing the assembly, gesturing wildly while making sounds like grinding metal. Other species responded with their own vocalizations, creating a cacophony that the human translation devices could barely process. The team sat quietly and watched, trying to understand what they were seeing. This was their first glimpse into galactic politics, and it was completely unlike anything they had expected. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering, and the complexity of managing communication between so many different species seemed almost impossible. As the hours passed, the humans began to notice patterns in the chaos. Different species, seemed to have alliances with each other. Some groups responded positively when certain speakers took the floor, while others remained silent or showed signs of disagreement. The political dynamics were incredibly complex, involving relationships that had probably developed over thousands of years. Ambassador Kane made careful notes about everything she observed. This was just the beginning of what would be a very long and complicated process. Within hours of Ambassador Kane's proposal, the council chamber transformed into something resembling a military command center. Species that had spent decades arguing with each other were suddenly working together under human coordination. The change was so dramatic that many representatives seemed shocked by their own cooperation. The Velkan Empire's war fleet moved into position exactly where Colonel Davis had predicted they would be most effective. Their aggressive tactics, which had often caused diplomatic problems in the past, proved devastating against Cronim assault formations. The Silicon Collective's advanced sensor networks provided real-time intelligence that human ships relayed to all Allied forces in the combat zones. Commander Hayes coordinated the multi-species defense from his position aboard the Meridian. But he was careful to work with existing command structures, rather than taking control away from local forces. Human ships served as communication hubs and tactical coordinators, allowing species with incompatible technology to share information and coordinate their attacks. The results were impressive and immediate. Cronim forces that had expected to face confused and disorganized resistance instead encountered coordinated defense networks that anticipated their moves. The attackers found themselves fighting battles that had been planned before they arrived, facing enemies who knew their tactics better than they knew themselves. Dr. Peters's behavioral analysis proved remarkably accurate. The Cronim horde retreated from two of their target systems exactly when and how he had predicted. His understanding of their psychology allowed human forces to pressure them in ways that triggered their instinctive withdrawal responses, ending the attacks with minimal additional casualties. The third battle zone required different tactics. The Kef Collective's homeworld was more heavily defended, so the Cronim had committed larger forces there and were less likely to retreat. Colonel Davis recommended a strategy that used the Cronim's aggressive nature against them, drawing their forces into positions where they could be surrounded and cut off from their supply lines. The plan worked perfectly. Within 72 hours of the initial attacks, Cronim forces were in full retreat from all three systems. Their carefully planned surprise assault had become a humiliating defeat that cost them significant military resources and revealed the locations of several hidden bases to Council intelligence services. The victory celebration in the Council chamber was unlike anything in galactic history. Species that had barely spoken to each other before the crisis were now praising their former enemies as valued allies. The Velkan Empire publicly thanked the Peaceful Alliance for their evacuation efforts. The Silicon Collective shared advanced technology with species they had previously considered primitive. During the celebration, something interesting happened that most species missed but the humans observed carefully. An elderly being approached Ambassador Kane privately while the rest of the council was focused on victory speeches and alliance declarations. The being introduced itself as Keeper Mothran, the council archivist. Keeper Mothran was ancient even by galactic standards, having served the council for over 800 years. It had witnessed the rise and fall of multiple civilizations and had seen every type of species join the galactic community. It told Ambassador Kane that in all its centuries of observation, no species had ever chosen to listen before speaking. The archivist revealed something that was not widely known among current council members. The Galactic Harmony Council had been founded over 3,000 years ago on principles very similar to what humanity had demonstrated. The original founders believed that understanding should come before judgment, that wisdom came from observation, and that true strength lay in unity rather than domination. Over the centuries, however, those founding principles had been gradually forgotten. Politics had become more important than cooperation. Species focused on advancing their own interests rather than serving the common good. The council had become exactly what its founders had tried to prevent, a place where the loudest voices drowned out the wisest counsel. Keeper Mothran told Ambassador Kane that humanity's approach had reminded the entire council of what they had lost. The crisis had shown them what they could accomplish when they worked together instead of against each other. The human example had brought out the best in species that had forgotten their own potential for cooperation. The conversation with the archivist gave Ambassador Kane new insights into galactic politics and the role humanity might play in the future. She realized that their unusual approach to diplomacy had not just solved an immediate crisis. It had demonstrated an alternative to the way galactic civilization had been operating for thousands of years. Over the following weeks, the effects of the crisis response continued to ripple through council politics. Species began forming new alliances based on what they had learned about each other during the coordinated defense efforts. Military cooperation led to increased trade and cultural exchange between former rivals. The human delegation found themselves in an unusual position. They were still technically only observers seeking council membership, but they had become informal advisors to multiple species and were regularly consulted on matters ranging from military strategy to trade negotiations. Dr. Peters established the Interspecies Understanding Institute, a research organization dedicated to studying communication and cooperation between different forms of intelligent life. His work during the crisis had shown that many diplomatic problems stemmed from simple misunderstandings about how different species processed information and made decisions. Colonel Davis was invited to address the Council Security Committee about defensive strategies and early warning systems. Her analysis of the Chronim threat had prevented what could have been a much larger and more devastating war. She proposed establishing permanent multi-species intelligence networks that would make future surprise attacks much more difficult to execute. Commander Hayes and the human fleet remained in the Outer Rim territories, working with local defense forces to establish the monitoring systems that had made their early detection of the Chronim possible. The network they created would serve as an early warning system for the entire galactic community. The most significant change, however, was in how the Council itself operated. Species began adopting what they called the human approach to difficult problems. Before jumping into debates, they would spend time listening to all perspectives and gathering information. They would look for solutions that used everyone's strengths rather than trying to impose single answers on complex situations. Speaker Zixith officially recognized these changes by establishing new procedural rules for council sessions. There would be mandatory observation periods before major decisions, time limits on speeches to ensure everyone could be heard, and requirements for collaborative solutions to problems that affected multiple species. The changes were not without controversy. Some traditional council members argued that the new procedures slowed down decision-making and gave too much influence to newer species. Others worried that the emphasis on cooperation would make the council weak and unable to respond to serious threats. But the success of the coordinated response to the Chronim crisis provided strong evidence that cooperation was actually more effective than competition. The council had accomplished in 3 days what might have taken months using their old methods, and they had done it with fewer casualties and better results than anyone had thought possible. Ambassador Kane realized that humanity was no longer seeking to join the galactic community. They were helping to reshape it. The silence that had initially confused and frustrated other species had become a powerful force for positive change throughout the galaxy. The test was complete, and the results would change everything. 1 year after the Chronim crisis, the council chamber looked remarkably different. The chaotic arrangements of previous decades had been replaced by a more organized structure that encouraged listening and collaboration. Representatives sat in mixed groups rather than species-only sections, fostering communication between different civilizations throughout each session. The day of humanity's formal induction into the Galactic Harmony Council arrived with ceremony that was markedly different from previous membership celebrations. Instead of beginning with elaborate speeches and grand declarations from the new members, the event opened with something unprecedented in council history. Complete silence. Every being in the chamber stopped talking, moving, or making any sound for exactly 1 minute. The moment had become known throughout the galaxy as the human moment, and it had been adopted by species across thousands of star systems as a way to pause, reflect, and truly listen to their surroundings before making important decisions. When the silence ended, Ambassador Kane approached the speaking platform one final time as humanity's representative seeking membership. But instead of the traditional acceptance speech, she did something that surprised even the species who had come to expect the unexpected from humans. She thanked the Council for the opportunity to learn from them over the past year. She acknowledged the wisdom they had shared through their actions rather than their words. She expressed gratitude for being allowed to observe the complex beauty of galactic civilization and to contribute to its continued growth and evolution. Then, she announced that humanity was honored to accept membership in the Galactic Harmony Council, but they wanted to do so in a way that served the entire galactic community. She proposed that Earth would establish the Observer Corps, a permanent program that would send rotating groups of humans to attend council sessions with no agenda other than listening and learning. The Observer Corps would not vote on issues or lobby for human interests. Instead, they would serve as neutral witnesses to council proceedings, taking detailed notes and providing observations about patterns and opportunities that might be missed by species more directly involved in political processes. Ambassador Kane had become Earth's permanent representative to the Council, but she had also taken on an additional role. She served as coordinator for the new institutions that had emerged from humanity's unique approach to galactic politics. The changes that had begun during the Chronim Crisis had grown into permanent improvements in how the Council operated. The reflection protocol had become standard procedure for all major Council decisions. Before voting on important matters, there was now a mandatory pause period, during which representatives were encouraged to consider perspectives they might have overlooked, and to think about long-term consequences rather than immediate political advantages. The silent voice system allowed species to contribute to council proceedings through actions and demonstrations rather than just speeches. Some species had always struggled with traditional debate formats due to their biology or cultural patterns, but they could now participate fully by showing rather than telling the council about their ideas and capabilities. The Understanding Initiative had become one of the most successful programs in council history. Cultural exchange programs brought young beings from different species together to learn about each other's ways of thinking and living. These programs had prevented dozens of potential conflicts and had led to breakthrough innovations in science, technology, and art. Captain Jake Morrison, now Admiral Morrison of the Joint Defense Fleet, continued to work with military forces throughout the galaxy to maintain the early warning systems that had prevented another surprise attack like the Chronim Assault. The intelligence networks they had established were jointly operated by multiple species and had successfully detected and deterred several potential threats. Colonel Davis, who had been promoted to general, oversaw the integration of different species military doctrines into coordinated defense strategies. Her work had shown that diversity in military thinking was actually a significant advantage when properly organized, making it much more difficult for enemies to predict or counter council responses. Dr. Peters led the Interspecies Understanding Institute, which had become the galaxy's premier research center for communication and cooperation between different forms of intelligent life. His work had not only improved diplomatic relations, but had also led to scientific breakthroughs as species learned to combine their different ways of understanding the universe. Commander Ben Hayes had been promoted to admiral and commanded the exploration fleets that were now joint operations between multiple species. The success of human coordination techniques had led to much more effective exploration of unknown regions of the galaxy, with mixed crews that could handle a much wider variety of situations than single-species expeditions. The changes initiated by humanity had spread far beyond the Council itself. Throughout the galaxy, species were adopting similar approaches to conflict resolution, business negotiations, and even family relationships. The idea that listening could be more powerful than speaking had resonated with civilizations that had never heard of Earth or humans. On this anniversary day, the Council was preparing to welcome another new species to membership. The Xerif Confederation had requested to join the galactic community, and they had prepared an elaborate presentation about their achievements, their technology, and their worthiness for inclusion. As the Xerif delegation prepared to address the Council, Ambassador Kane approached their leader quietly. She whispered a simple question that had become traditional when new species joined the Council. "Before you speak to the galaxy, would you like to listen to it first?" The Zarif representative looked confused by the question, but something in Ambassador Kane's expression made them pause. They looked out at the assembled representatives of hundreds of different species, all waiting to hear what the newest candidates for membership had to say. Instead of launching into their prepared speech, the Zarif delegation quietly took seats in the observation gallery. They pulled out recording devices and began taking notes about what they saw and heard. The council proceedings continued around them while they listened and learned, just as humans had done 1 year earlier. The sight of another species choosing to observe before speaking caused murmurs of approval throughout the chamber. Many representatives nodded or made gestures that indicated satisfaction with the new arrival's approach. The pattern that humanity had established was becoming the new standard for how civilized species introduced themselves to the galactic community. Keeper Mothran, the ancient council archivist, watched the proceedings with what might have been a smile on its alien features. It began updating the official council records with the day's events, but it paused to add a personal note that would become part of galactic history. The archivist wrote that this day marked the first anniversary of humanity's first words to the council. 3 simple words that had changed everything. We listen. The note continued that the council had never forgotten that day, and the galaxy had been quieter, wiser, and stronger ever since. The transformation was complete, but it was also just beginning. Every day brought new opportunities to apply the lessons that humanity had taught through their example. The silence that had once confused the council had become the foundation for a new age of galactic cooperation. Species throughout the galaxy had learned that sometimes the most profound contributions came not from those who spoke the loudest, but from those who listened the longest. The echo of that lesson would continue to resonate across the stars for generations to come, making the galaxy a better place for all forms of intelligent life. The council never forgot that day, and neither did the universe.